And we're back with more College Radio Day on mavradio.fm. I'm Jodine Brownlee, faculty advisor for the college radio station. And with me today is one of my formers and one of the most amazing fellas you'd want to know. His name's Brett Kane. He's a radio host out in Denver, Colorado for Altitude Sports Radio. Hi, Brett. How's it going?
I'm doing great. Good to see you again. Thanks for having me here.
It's good to see you. And I don't know if you can see the mountains from where you're at, but you got quite a view out there in Denver.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, I can't see them where I'm at. You got to go a little bit farther west. See, in Denver, it's very expensive, so you have to go. If you want some more house, you got to go a little bit farther away. But yeah, we can get a little glimpse. It's good enough.
And it's a drive away, so it's all good,
30
right?
minutes. Yeah.
Wow. So Brett, let's talk a little bit about where you're at right now, and then we'll jump back a little bit to your history. But what are you doing right now?
So I'm doing a morning show for Altitude Sports Radio. It's a radio station where we are partners with the Colorado Avalanche in the NHL and the Nuggets in the NFL. But we're an all sports station, and right now it's heavy Broncos. But I don't know when this is airing. At the time we're talking right now, the Nuggets are still in the NBA playoffs, or what, 4 teams left, so they're taking a lot of attention. But yeah, I'm a sports nerd. I'm a sports nerd. That's what I am.
And I know you've always loved sports, and saying sports nerd, I see what you have there on your hat. And I think that's how you and I both became we had this sort of symbiotic relationship. I actually had a Lions blanket in my office at the time.
That's right.
Betwixt the two of us, that doesn't happen very often. So interesting story, and kind of, I think, how maybe we bonded over the.
I think it's a rare win for the Lions. They don't get too many of those. I'll count that as a W.
So right now it sounds like you're living the dream. This is something that you've been working for quite a few years, and you started in college. And again, that was when Mav Radio was really first at its true infancy. And there weren't real sports to cover. But you always kept yourself busy. I can remember you immersed in sports, reading the newspapers, checking out websites, always updated with scores. How much of you did you bring into this career, if that makes any sense?
I think a lot. It's funny because I look back and here's what I knew when I got to college. I really didn't know what I wanted to major in. I didn't have some grand plan that I was going to be some radio host, but I knew I didn't want a 9-to-5. It's just like I'm super disorganized. And ironically enough, even though I'm doing a morning show now, I don't like waking up early. But I just knew I wanted something to where I like talking in front of people. I'm vain in the way that I like my voice being heard. I like a spotlight every once in a while. And I love sports. I played baseball at UNO, and sports were always a passion of mine. But more than that, I just liked trying to be funny and entertaining and stuff like that. And this just felt like the right place to do it. And the second that I kind of got into it, I remember even before I took a radio class, I just saw the radio station at that time. I don't know if it's still there, but they had the radio station like it was right next to like the dining hall, kind of.
Yeah, Milo Bell Student Center. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I walked in, I was like, so who gets to do this? They're like, well, if you sign up, like kind of anybody can. So I tried it a couple of times and I was terrible, but I was like, this is kind of fun. This would be a fun job. But you're right. When you say dream job, this is really it. Like I got all 4 major sports here. And, I think it's important when you say, how much of you do you bring to it? I think it's the most important thing, no matter what it is, whether it's sports or politics or, news radio, whatever it is, you have to bring your own sort of thing to it. You have to find what your voice is. It's the most important thing. So if you're sitting there and you're trying to kind of carve out your own sort of niche, well, I didn't, and nobody should. You don't want to be another Sean Hannity. There's already one of those. You don't want to be another Rachel Maddow. You don't want to be another Skip Bayless, or, you name it. You name whatever the thing is that you're doing. You got to find your own way to do things. And finding your voice is hard. Like, it's difficult. It took me probably 4 or 5 years before I really found out what I wanted my voice to be. Because when you're at a party, it's easy, right? You're just yourself. You're around your friends. It's comfortable. But it's almost like the second you hit the microphone, especially early, you're trying to be something that you think people want you to be. And authenticity is the most important thing. When you look at the most successful people in this business, they are truly themselves. And you can tell because they're different. You know what I mean? And so I think bringing yourself into it and finding whatever you are, it should be key number one. And it's going to take time to figure it out.
So how'd you figure it out? I mean, you went on the radio station in college, and that's the whole point of this entire interview is to celebrate College Radio Day worldwide and the collective voice. But you started in College Radio Day. How long did it take to find your voice? How did you do that? What was the process?
You always you always have a semblance of who you are. You're always kind of yourself. And I put it to you this way. I look at radio almost like music in a sense, to where you can listen to a band. Like I really like Greta Van Fleet. They sound like Zeppelin. You know what I mean? And they have an influence of that. And a lot of bands have, who's your musical influence? Everybody can point to something, but they're still themselves in a certain way. And so what I would recommend to people to help figure this out is to just listen to a whole bunch of different types of personalities, people you hate. Like, even if you're like, I can't stand this guy. Well, obviously he's doing something that's kind of successful, right? So find out what that is. Like, I don't really listen to news talk radio. I don't. It's not something I enjoy anyway. But I listen to Glenn Beck because he's good. Like he's good at it. And something I picked up from Glenn Beck was, and this is something that I've taken with me for years now. He doesn't do the, you come back from break and it's, hey, welcome to the Glenn Beck show. I'm so-and-so. In 15 minutes, he just goes, like he gets right into the topic. And I'm like, man, he cuts all the fat. And I think if you listen to different people, if you're in sports talk, you listen outside of sports talk and you listen to other types of things. If you're in news talk, listen to a sports show, listen to a pop culture show, something like that. I think that helps. And I get made fun of for this, but I mean it. Jodine, I'm not a wrestling fan. Like, I don't like the WWE, but I'm telling you, some of the greatest entertainers we have right now are professional wrestlers. Listen to them when they grab a microphone and watch the audience and how they captivate them. It's amazing. So just go around and sample different things, and that it'll help. It's going to help you find out who you are.
Wow, I love that advice because that's something I didn't really even think of. WWE, whoa. But you're right, they are great entertainers,
Mm-hmm.
fantastic entertainers. So, what was the road, and your story isn't by any means close to being finished, and who knows what the future leads for you. But what about the road you took to get to where you're at? How'd that start?
It really was just, you just take the opportunities that are given to you and don't really say no. And I'm not one of those people that says you have to take everything that's offered to you. I don't think so. But certainly don't be super close-minded. And, it's funny, growing up in Omaha and moving to a place like this, I work with a lot of people that are from Denver. And so I listen to a lot of producers or interns that are stationed. And they're like, yeah, I'm trying to find a job in Phoenix. And I'm like, well, don't close off, a whole bunch of markets. Like when I did radio in Lincoln, don't look at that and snub your nose at it, because that's where you can grow and get better. So for me, I took an internship that led to a part-time job at AM 590 in Omaha. And that turned into a full-time job as a producer there. And then in that time producing, I met somebody who was the host at the time. He got a job elsewhere. He called me a couple of years later to co-host with him. And it's establishing relationships and really just working hard and being willing and open to do different things. So after that, he gave me the call to get a job in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I was psyched, right? Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was actually a lot like Omaha. And I was like, this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to do sports radio as a host. This is great. And I got my welcome to radio moment immediately. I barely got all my bags unpacked. 6 months later, they said the show's canceled, and I didn't know what to do after that. I was fortunate enough to come back to Omaha. I got a job doing radio in Lincoln for 93.7 The Ticket for about 3 years. And then after that, I got here. And don't get discouraged on stuff like that. Like I was pissed when the show got canceled. I'm like, seriously? I'm so bad that in 6 months of me first trying to do this, they're like, nah, this ain't gonna work, dude. You got to get the hell out of here. You know what I mean?
Wow.
But it just leads to different things, and you can't just stop. Like in radio, it's so cliche, but it's like if you haven't been fired, you're probably not doing something right.
That's exactly right. And when I work with people that have experienced that kind of personal heartbreak, I mean that not only personal heartbreak for you, but financially that had to be so
Yeah.
tough. And I can imagine where it's you just wanted to say, you know what, I'm done. Wash my hands of what I love. The dream is gone. How did you how'd you not give up, Brett?
I just felt like, and again, this is where maybe vanity comes in, and I guess you got to have a little bit of it. I just thought I was good at it, and so when I was told the show was canceled, I was like, okay, well, I can go do this somewhere else. Just because it didn't work here doesn't mean like I'm totally awful at it. And maybe it's, I was fortunate enough to play a sport like baseball to where you fail all the time, and it doesn't matter. You get back out there the next day, like you can go 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts, and you know what? You could hit a homer the next day. And you just have that constant stuff. So I think that sports in earlier in my life actually really helped from that sense. But just believe in yourself. And if somebody says you can't do it, like, okay, fine, watch me. You know what I mean? There's been so many times that I wanted to send an email to that program director and be like, see, no. See, I knew I had something here. If you just gave it more time, I knew I had something. But yeah, when somebody says you suck, good, fine, I don't care. What does it matter to me? I'm going to keep trying this thing. And that's part of it. Criticism is going to be a part of this job. And I think for younger people, we were kind of talking about this earlier, but I think this is important. We all have Twitter and Facebooks and Instagrams and Snapchats and blah, blah, blah. I guarantee you are going to have somebody say you suck every day. Every single day. In fact, I got one. I get the text number for a radio station in my head right now, his phone number, because every day he says I suck. And that's just part of it. You can't let that bog you down, and you can't get distracted by it. And I think it comes from, as long as you have a confidence in yourself, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what they say.
How do you respond to the social media?
I don't. Now, at times I will, only if I think I can say something funny and snarky. That's my exception. But I feel like if you respond to anybody who does that, you're giving them exactly what they want. And I'm not going to give you that satisfaction. You know what I mean? If you just want to be an ass, go ahead. But here's the other thing. That guy that I just mentioned who texts every day, and he says the same thing. He says, Kane sucks. It's 2 words. And I swear to God, it's the only things that he says. And you know what? He texts every 30 minutes saying that. And in my head, I go, you're texting every 30 minutes? You're listening the entire show? I got you. Like, you're an idiot. I have you exactly where I want you. You're listening to the show. If you have a meter, like if you have a diary, if you have something that gets me ratings, I don't care if you hate me or you love me. I'm doing my job.
That's right. And if you're making everybody happy, you might not be doing it right.
Name one person in media whatsoever that you can say is universally beloved. It does not exist. Somebody hates them. In fact, the most successful people you can think of, most people probably hate them. Like the one that you can always go to, and the easy one in radio is Stern, right? Stern has, I don't know how accurate his movie was. What was his movie called?
Private Parts?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if I can suggest you watch that on this.
I actually showed that to one of my classes one time
Good.
because they said, "Hey, we want to watch Private Parts." And I was, yeah, I remember seeing that. I think it's good. Okay. Oh, yeah.
See, you know what? Though? It's good because there's a line
It is
there's a line I've never forgotten from that movie. And I don't know if he's lying in this, but it's still the truth to me. They were going over ratings, and Pig Vomit was trying to get him fired. And he said, so how long do people who like the show listen? He goes, an hour and a half. An hour and a half. Wow, that's a long time. Why? The top answer was, I want to see what he says next. He goes, what about the people who hate the show? 2 hours and 30 minutes. He goes, consecutively? Yeah, 2 hours and 30 minutes. Why? Top answer, I want to see what he says next. just because people say they hate you or you suck or your opinion stinks or whatever it is, it does not mean that you're doing poor at your job. You aren't doing your job poorly at all. You're keeping people captivated and you're making them feel an emotion. And that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to make them feel informed, entertained, happy, sad, mad, whatever the emotion is. You're trying to do something to keep them tuned into you. And I'm not saying to be fake. Some people like it. Like in sports, Skip Bayless, I don't know if he believes a word that he says on the show, and I never wanted to do that. I never wanted to be that, but that's part of finding your voice, right? He found something that worked and he wanted to stick with it. But whatever it is, he inflicts some kind of emotion that keeps people tuned into his show, his TV show, his radio show, whatever it is. And that's the most important thing.
Well, and I'll tell you, sports is one of those things too that people are as passionate about their team as they are their own children.
Yep.
And so you've got that passion and the emotion. And I still think of that intimacy of the medium. Sports can still capture that. That's why I think sports radio is so important, particularly in times that we're dealing with right now. Which, speaking of which, what does a sports talk show host do when there's no sports?
That's a great question, isn't it? It's funny. I look back and I still think, like, what did we talk about? 4 hours a day when there was, what was it? March 12th, I think, was the last games that were played. And then they got going sometime in August, I think, or maybe it was late July. I can't remember. But really, you kind of stick to your format. To be honest, we went outside a little bit because it wasn't just the pandemic. There was, civil unrests and protests and, being in Denver, there was a lot of that happening downtown. And so we didn't really know what to do. And we dabbled a little bit into the, I don't know if you want to call it political, but just like the everyday life and the more, getting into protests and COVID and stuff like that. And I think we realized pretty quick it wasn't benefiting us doing that. So we just tried to stay away. And then our job was just kind of like, okay, how much can we make people laugh today? And you still kind of center it around sports. There's still plenty to talk about in the middle of that because it's coming back at some point. We just didn't know when. But that was a real learning experience because some people can do it. Some people can do that. They can dabble into that sort of area. Like Clay Travis, he hasn't stopped. He's been, once COVID hit, his entire show's been about COVID and not a lot about sports. And he's been doing great numbers. Now, again, that goes back to, is he going to make you mad if you disagree with him? He's still inflicting some sort of emotion. It was just something I think for us, we weren't comfortable with, and we tried it and it didn't work. But that was one of those times to where, like, there was no playbook. Nobody really knew what to do. So you were just trying different stuff and kind of seeing what worked and what didn't. But I can tell you this, we're happy sports are back now. We are. It certainly makes it easier.
Have you found much of a, trying to think of the right words to say here, because politics has been sort of commingling with sports. And it used to be, at least from my experience, sports was kind of an escape from all that. But I don't think there's any way you can really get away from that, talking about, what athlete is talking about what today. Kind of changes on a daily. But how do you straddle that line?
I think it's another one of those personal things. If you feel comfortable getting into that, I think you can. I never have. Now, when I got into this, I think I said this at the beginning, it was just like, I wanted a job. I always say this, I'm not a journalist. I don't consider myself a journalist at all. I consider my job a jackass with a microphone. That's what I do. Okay. So I'm just trying to make you laugh, smile, whatever it is, while centering around sports. And so I think you certainly can. I never felt comfortable with it. I didn't feel prepared, and that was probably the toughest part of having no sports. I always considered myself more like more Beavis and Butthead than I did Anderson Cooper, and so you kind of had to play an Anderson Cooper role because you are bringing information still. People need to hear that. If you have information, you have, just no matter what your show's centered around, when something that big affects everyday life, that's your primary job.
Yeah.
If something affects primary life in that way, you have to kind of put your reporter hat on and do that whole song and dance. I've just never felt comfortable with it. So if I found an exit route, I would take it, because that's just not something I enjoyed. But there's certainly a lot of people that can do that and do that in a very, very productive way. That was just never me. That was one of those, we go back to the beginning of this, where I say you got to be authentic, right? I felt like a faker during all of that. I wasn't being myself. And the second you feel that way, everybody else can feel that too.
Yeah, that's a great point. Really powerful point to make. So let me ask you this. What's your next week look like? Today's, what is it today? Friday. So what is the week in your life look like?
So football this weekend, with the Nuggets still playing, it's a lot of that. I go to Broncos practice once a week. They kind of have, there's a lot of rules. So they only allow one person from each outlet right now, except for some newspapers and stuff like that. So I go to Broncos practice every Thursday, but that's kind of it. The nice thing about doing morning radio is that when the show gets done at 10, I don't really hang around. It hits 10 o'clock, show's done, and I kind of head home, and I got the rest of the day to kind of do whatever I feel like. Waking up stinks. I hate it, but it's nice to have that. But it's really just, it's the beauty of what this job is. I enjoy sports. I enjoy talking. And so, again, to spit out another cliche, it's never felt like work. It really hasn't, because I love this. I would be doing this every day anyway, be sitting out here watching games, and now you're getting paid for it. It's great. And going to Broncos camp, like, how awesome. You know what I mean? How great is that?
It'd be pretty awesome. And I remember about your time, we had another student who is active in play-by-play in sports here in Omaha. And I remember he was sitting in the very classroom that you were in. And one day I looked over to him and we were talking about covering sports and news. And I said, how much time will you spend a day looking at the newspaper and looking at sports? And he said, oh, probably about 6 hours. He said, but that's what I do every day anyway,
Uh-huh.
regardless if it's my job or not.
Yep. It's a great excuse for your wife, too. If she ever wants to say, no, we need to go to Home Depot today. Nah, there's a game on. Remember, I'm working today. You have to keep that in mind.
My husband's excuse, yeah, for Hobby Lobby. He didn't want to go to Hobby Lobby. He'll do anything. Go, no Hobby Lobby. So, Brett, let's talk about where we can listen to you and hear your voice and hear your commentary.
Sure. We got, so we have an app. It's Altitude Sports Radio app. You can download that on iTunes and all that good stuff. We have podcasts on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and we actually have a Twitch channel that launched kind of when the pandemic hit back in March. So if you wanted to listen or watch the show live, you can do that on twitch.tv, and then you just search Altitude SR in the search bar, and we're right there.
Altitude SR. I'm writing all this down so I can put it out there, because I'm positive everybody's going to hear this interview and be so riveted that they can't wait to go listen to Brett Kane.
Could I mention one last thing, by the way?
Absolutely.
I actually had this written down. This was when we were talking about knowing who you are. I think it's important to know your audience too. And I don't think it's something that people think about all that much. A lot of times, like, I'm wearing this Lions hat right now, and I love this team. And I could talk about them for 4 hours, even though they stink. I could talk about how they stink for 4 hours. But if you tried to do that on the show here in Denver, you're just like, people don't care. And I think knowing your audience is very important. And I've had it down, and I learned this from Bruce Gilbert, who at the time was the head of sports for Cumulus Media. And he had a meeting with me and my old co-host, and we did this exercise. And I think this is really cool for people to do. Once you know what kind of your target demographic is, like for us in radio, it's men 25 to 54. He had us almost explain a single person to a T. Okay, so we narrowed this guy down to a 35-year-old dude with 2 kids and a wife and a dog, and he's got, a decent sized house and blah, blah, blah. You do all this stuff. Like, he likes football. He's kind of into baseball. you have every detail of this guy knocked out. And the way that you can go about your topics for that day, if you're doing like a daily radio show, is if you saw this guy at a barbecue, never met him before, but you knew this about him, what would you talk to him about? And that's like, that's something I've learned here, because when I was in Nebraska, it was just Nebraska football. That is the biggest story. It's always the biggest story. It doesn't matter if it's May and football season's been over for months. That's the thing. But here you have the Broncos and the Avalanche and the Nuggets and the Rockies and a whole bunch of other stuff, right? CU football and CU basketball. And so I was almost like, well, what do I spend the time on? And a lot of times those sports are overlapping. And so the way that I go about it is, if I saw this guy today, what's the first thing I tell him about? Okay, the first thing, that's my big story of the day. That's the thing that's getting talked about for, 3 or 4 segments out of the 4 hours. And then you kind of line it up like that, and it made it a lot easier. And I think just knowing who your audience is and making sure you are catering to their needs and not necessarily your own is a really important thing that I don't know how many people really think about when they go about prepping their show, whatever it is.
How do you decide that? So what the major, I don't want to say news, but the hot item of the day is? How do you decide that?
It's the same process. So, for example, today, like, this is football season, and this town is Broncos crazy. You will never go wrong talking about the Denver Broncos. But with the Nuggets in the Western Conference Finals, they're playing against the Lakers and LeBron James. Like, this isn't even a local story. This is a national story. This is, you turn on Sports Center and they're on TV. That's going to be the thing that leads. Like, if I talk to somebody, if I walked outside my driveway right now and some guy's walking his dog and I say, did you catch the game last night? I got him. Like, he's going to say something about it. Now, if I say something about the Broncos, he's probably going to be into it, but there's something bigger, even though the Nuggets aren't a bigger team than the Broncos are. And so it's just trying to hammer out which one of those in the moment is most important, because we know this. If you ask anybody, if you just say, hey, it's day X, I'm not giving you a time of the year. I'm just saying it's day X. What are you talking to somebody about sports wise? The answer is always Broncos, always. But you kind of have to read the temperature of the room and what's going on around you. And maybe an easier way to put it is, if you only have 10 minutes to get somebody's attention for whatever your topic is. So for me, it's sports. If I had 10 minutes to get your attention today, what is it? That's going to be your main story. And also keep this in mind. If you have a longer show, if your show's 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever it is, the average listener is in their car for 15 to 20 minutes. Well, if you're saying, I talked about that already. Yeah, that was an hour ago. The people in their cars now didn't hear an hour ago on your show. Be sure to reset those things, especially if it's the big story. Like, I don't know a lot about music stations, Jodine, but I do know this. When Taylor Swift has a new song, I hear that all the time, whether I want to or not. I hear it all the time. And why? Because people listen at different times. And if they want to turn on the radio and listen to that Taylor Swift song, you're like, well, I played that 50 minutes ago. Yeah, well, that person's out of the car. This one probably wants to listen to it now.
That's right. Wow. I have to tell you, Brett, watching you and hearing your advice to students and to other folks in this industry, it's really makes my heart happy. Makes me just so proud to see all that you've taken with you into your career, and to get to have seen that and experience it. It's really made me proud, made me feel good to see that we have so much talent coming out of our university, our state, and can impact a lot of people.
Yeah. It's well, thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I promise you guys this. I promise you will have fun doing this. I promise. It is such a fun job to do. It is not like you see some of those people, they're beat down on a Friday, they get home and they got their tie on, they loosen that up. They're like, oh God, I need a drink. What a terrible week. I have not had that feeling once. I really haven't. And it's a great job. The one piece of advice I would give you, just pray to God your spouse makes money. At least for the short term. Like, when you first do it, make sure that you find somebody like that. Because if you're good enough, it's going to work. But I promise you, man, this is the most fun job I can imagine. It's fantastic.
Actually, that does lead to another thing. Students, I'll tell them it's not going to pay in the beginning, it pays very, very poorly.
Hmm.
And you're going to have to give up a job that might pay 14 or $15 an hour at a large chain company. But if this is what you love to do, you have to sacrifice that. You have to do that. You have to get into the part-time jobs that are going to pay minimum wage.
Hmm.
And then you have to do it consistently. You
Well,
have to put in the time.
I'll be honest. My first job out of college, it was a full-time job. I made $23,000. That was in 2011, 2012, somewhere in that ballpark. And so it's just like you as long as you know going in, and again, as long if you believe in yourself and you stick to it, the longer you stay in this business, the more it's going to come, and you'll make more money and you'll be more comfortable. But that's just something that, yes, you should know going into this. There is no $100,000 job to do a radio gig right out of college. That does not exist. And you might have some friends that go to some stockbroker business or they work at a bank and they do that. It's just something you got to accept kind of off the jump. But if you're able to get over that part, and I'm not going to say it doesn't matter to you, because of course it does. It's money. Like, you have to make money. You have to pay your bills. You have to do all this stuff. But as long as you can kind of hang on to that for a couple of years, if you need to get another job outside of it, you get another job outside of it. But this really is a job that you have to love. And it's easy to love this job. It is. But as long as you put in the work, it's going to get recognized, and that will start to catch up with you. It's just a matter of, do you want to stick with it? Do you want to do it? And once you get the itch, you know this, once you get the itch of doing this, I can't imagine it ever leaving. I really can't.
I can't either. It's a remarkable responsibility, but also it's so much fun. So
Mhm.
much fun. This has been so amazing to talk to you. As I let you go, do you have any parting words for uh, our audience, for UNO students, but also this is global. This is worldwide, World College Radio Day. Any parting words?
I think all I would say is, if this is something that you want to do, know that you're going to have to work hard. Know that it's not always going to be easy. Know that you're probably going to make an ass of yourself once or twice. That's going to happen, where you're going to feel really, really embarrassed. That's bound to happen. But as long as you stick with it, God, it gets so much more comfortable. And then it just, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. It's not work. It's nothing like that. It's just something fun. It's almost like a hobby that you get paid for. And as long as you keep working at it, you're going to get better and better. But I think I'd go back to this. As you know, when I was in college, didn't really know what my voice was, what I wanted to sound like. Listen to everybody that you can. People who are successful, people who are bad. Listen to people who are bad and figure out why they're bad and say, I'm never going to do that. And also, never, ever, ever be adverse to criticism. People aren't doing that as long as they're your peers, right? Somebody on Twitter, some egg avatar is saying that just to be a jerk. Okay. You can ignore that one. That one doesn't matter. But if there's somebody that is your program director or somebody in the business that said, hey, you know what, you're doing this a little bit too much. Do not act like you know better than them. You know, we brought up Stern earlier. Stern had a little bit of that. Oh, program director, get out of my face. You don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, that works for maybe 1% of the people who can do this. There's a lot of smart people here, and they're saying this to help you get better. And you have to combine their advice with your voice. You can tune some of it out and accept some other stuff, but don't be unresponsive to criticism, because a lot of times there's a point to it.
Wow. Great words to end on. Thanks so much, Brett. Brett Kane, radio host, Altitude Sports Radio. You can find him on podcasts. Download the app at Altitude Sports Radio, and Twitch TV, Altitude SR. Is that?
Yep.
All right.
Nailed it.
All right, Brett. Thanks so much.
You bet.